Welcome into this week's The Women's Basketball Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things WNBA. I guess I can say unrivaled. Maybe we may have a shout to that or two. Women's college basketball. Oh, yes, we've still got your college hoops fix. Mitchell Northam of SB Nation, Mia O'Brien. So excited to bring you a recap of opening weekend of the WNBA season and a whole lot more. Mitch, it has been, I forget if it's The Simpsons or what the meme is from, where it has been 0 days since our last hijinks, since our last beef in the W. Literally write it on a whiteboard, cross it out. We're right back where we were. We're right back on our ish. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. And yeah, the WNBA has already reached its capacity for drama and discourse and things that like don't have anything to do with basketball that people want to talk about.
We are taping this on a Tuesday, which means, for those of you keeping score, we are 5 days into the W season. We already have our classic right back to Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark beef. We've got games galore to talk about, both that have happened, that will happen. We've got hot takes and much, much more. We will have a whole main event section of this podcast, of today's show, a little bit later, that will dive deeper into, yes, the biggest storyline when it comes to the WNBA in earnest in its 2025 season. But we begin, Mitch, as we do each and every week, with our Her of the Week. And I'm giving you the floor for this week's Her of the Week because you made the bold prediction over the last few weeks, all of our preview shows, that you believed Kelsey Plum would lead the W in scoring. She's currently third, but she dropped 37 points on opening night against the Golden State Valkyries, and undisputed bus driver, I think fair to say, for the Los Angeles Sparks.
Yeah, feeling pretty good about that Kelsey Plum bet to lead the WNBA in scoring this year. Yeah, 27.5 points per game through 2 games so far. The other thing that jumped out at me is, and it's an early sample size to be sure, but she's leading the league in minutes played per game, 37 minutes over, an average over those first 2 games, which gets back to my original point of she is the number one option here with the Sparks. She's going to be on the floor a lot. She's going to have the ball in her hands a lot, and she's going to get to shoot a lot. And if we remember from her college days, Kelsey Plum is a pretty good shooter, pretty good scorer, helped the Aces win 2 titles, with all that. So, I think her being kind of the number one scoring option here is going to bode well for anyone who made that bet or still wants to make that bet. She is also second in the league right now in free throws made per game with 8, and 6th in 3-pointers made per game with 3.5. So, small sample size, but if those numbers keep up, real chance that Kelsey Plum could find herself at the top of the leaderboard at the end of the season.
Cam Brink not currently with the Sparks as she recovers from that torn ACL she suffered late last June. Expectation is that the former number 2 overall pick will return at some point in early June. I'm not going to lie, Mitch, if you're taking a victory lap, if only for a 2-game sample size, I will also take one. In case you missed last week's show, we did our paper plate awards, our superlatives, our way too early Wubby preseason awards, and my silent assassin, sneaky good shooter for the 2025 WNBA season was Kea Jackson on opening night. Yeah, 5 of 15 from the floor, but 3 of 6 from 3-point range. I wish I'd made an actual bet, like my friend Mitch Northam here did on Kelsey Plum. Let's keep it moving with this week's starting 5, our 5 biggest storylines in the wide world of women's sports. Look, like we said, we're going to have a whole main entree in a little bit, diving into the Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark situation, but I do want to at least begin there with this, Mitch. The Indiana Fever. So many people looked at, well, they have Caitlin Clark, they have Aaliyah Boston, they're going to have all these national games. Everyone's going to have them in their national conscious. They're going to get all this hype. But I want to take all the publicity out of it. And if I can possibly, I know it's kind of difficult to separate Caitlin Clark and the hype train from her actual play on a basketball court. But I want to commend the entire Indiana Fever operation from top to bottom and how they have constructed this roster, including their front office, bringing back some old familiar faces, including Stephanie White, who is, of course, now the head coach once again of the Indiana Fever. The fact that they made bold moves to say goodbye to Christy Sides, to say, yes, certainly we started putting it together in the second half of the season, but the enemy of great is good. They go out, they bring DeWanna Bonner from Connecticut with Stephanie White. That's the veteran presence you need. And certainly someone who has a ton, as the third all-time leading scorer in WNBA history, a ton of postseason experience, that a roster that had just 19 total postseason games under their belt headed into the 2024 playoffs. They needed that. Sophie Cunningham, all the weird drama aside, one of the we're not going to dive into that here. Yeah, that's a weird one. Maybe next week. One of the best sixth women of the year, in my opinion, in terms of the candidates. Certainly could make that argument a couple of the last few seasons when she was with the Phoenix Mercury. Natasha Howard, another veteran presence inside to complement Aaliyah Boston from top to bottom. And I think when you juxtapose, Mitch, the construction of the Fever roster with that of their opening night counterpart in the Chicago Sky, all the pieces fit together. And I understand it's a small sample size. As we're recording this podcast, the Fever getting ready to face the Atlanta Dream at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. But I think it's really important to just look at how the Sky are being constructed, where their centerpieces in a perhaps more, we'll call it throwback format, are two forwards in Camila Cardoso and Angel Reese, who both shot less than 50% from the floor on Saturday afternoon. And yet Haley Van Lith comes off the bench and has 4 points in 4 minutes. You might want to play her a little bit more. And then you look at the Fever, where they can play this 5-out, 4-out offense where every single woman on the floor has an opportunity to create her own shot in her own fashion, whether that be from 3-point range, driving to the hoop, whatever it may be. And so for me, I just look at it and the puzzle pieces fit, and it's a long season, but I can't help but just be proud of a team that said, yes, we're good, but we know our window is now here. We thought we maybe had a year or two, but it's here, and we are pushing all our chips to the middle of the table.
Yeah, I think if you go back to last season, I think the Fever's brass front office, brainpower, whatever you want to call it, I think it was clear that they knew that, okay, we have the makings of something here. We have Caitlin and Kelsey, like we talked about. They had a big three: Caitlin, Kelsey, Aaliyah Boston, right? And they knew that they had something there with that, and the goal was just to build around it and amplify it and put them in the best position possible. Whereas I think if you go to the Sky at the end of last season, while a lot of people thought that that coach shouldn't have lost their job, they did, and they really didn't have a direction one way or the other. It's like we have this Kennedy Carter thing going on. Now she's not even in the W this year. Okay, we have Angel Reese. Okay, we have Camila Cardoso. Like, Angel is clearly a star to me. Camila hasn't quite grown into that just yet. And then I think they're still trying to figure it out. Like, I don't really expect, despite the star power, the Sky to be a playoff team this year. I think it's clear that, like, they're a year behind the Fever. Like, this is, you hope, if you're a Sky fan or Tyler Marsh or whoever, that this is the year that you figure out what the path forward is, like who you can build around, who are the building blocks, and that sort of thing. As far as the Fever goes, I think that when they put this roster together in the offseason, I imagine that, when they thought of like what the perfect night would be for them, it was pretty close to something like this. If you just look at the numbers, you talk about 40 combined points, rebound, assists for Caitlin Clark. That's pretty good. That's what you want out of her. And then you get double-digit scoring from Kelsey Mitchell and Natasha Howard and Aaliyah Boston, all of whom shooting over 50% from the floor in that game. DeWanna Bonner does her thing, savvy vet coming in, 7 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, just kind of stuff in the stat sheet across the board, doing the little things, defending at a high level. Lexi Hall doing good things off the bench. And, you played this well and won by, 35 points without Sophie Cunningham, like you mentioned, who we think is somebody who could be the 6th player of the year. They had 10 blocks on a team against a team that has Camila Cardozo and Angel Reese. 5 of those blocks were from Aaliyah Boston. Aaliyah Boston, by the way, I mean, just had a really great game, 13 rebounds, like really starting to kind of come into her own, I think, as a W player, and could have her best season yet this year. So, yeah, I think if you're the Fever, you're very happy with the season debut that you had. You even had a couple other players that like you might not expect to contribute that did some good things off the bench. Michaela Timpson, undrafted free agent, 4 points, 3 minutes doing her thing. I think if they thought, what would be a great night for us, the stats would probably look a lot like this.
To put names to the faces, to the creators of this roster. Do want to note, obviously, Lynn Dunn is as instrumental with the Fever as she ever was, but certainly bringing Kelly Krauskopf back. She was with the Indiana Pacers as their assistant GM. I forgot to mention her name off the top for the last 7 years, since 2018, which coincided with she was actually the GM who drafted Kelsey Mitchell. And as we all know, Kelsey Mitchell's first 7 years in the league, not exactly anything to cry home about with the Indiana Fever. For
Right.
Kelly to come back, hires Amber Cox from the Dallas Wings. Certainly they bring Stephanie back, and that's huge. Again, I think it just speaks to this is an entire city and an entire operation. And I can say this from covering the National Football League as well. You can't always guarantee that after a team has a breakthrough season that they are going to say, hey, here we go. We're putting all our assets. We're pushing everything we possibly can to make this work. Because I've seen it with the team I cover in the Jacksonville Jaguars after that 2022 playoff run. They said, we're going to bank on our players taking the leap and our coaching, like our consistency, continuity. It'll be fine. Imagine if this team had kept Christy Sides. Imagine if they had not opted to go out in free agency and be aggressive and bring in these veteran pieces. For me, it's a no-brainer in terms of proof of concept, in terms of roster building. The Fever, if only through the opening weekend of the season, A+ in my eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in terms of roster building, roster construction, yeah, they've nailed it so far. Like it's looking like what they imagined, I think, so far. And again, small sample size, first game, all that, but that's as good as you could have hoped for. Win a game by 35 points and have all of your best players play their best games, and then have your available healthy role players doing what they do in certain spots. The absence of Sophie Cunningham notwithstanding. So yeah, it's a great debut for the Fever. I think, and if you're somebody who bet on them in the preseason to win the title, like you're feeling pretty happy about what you saw on opening night.
And like I said, as we're recording this, the Fever about to take on the Dream. Shout out to our friend Pat Boylan, friend of the pod, and Debbie Antonelli, who have just popped up on my television screen off to my left. And a shout out to Sports Illustrated, great profile on the Fever and how they've constructed this roster outside of the reality that, yes, they do have Caitlin Clark. Let's keep it moving. A brief foray into the college ranks, Mitch. This one is a little dicey, to say the least. You could argue it's the biggest story in college basketball right now on the women's side. What exactly is going on out there in Big Ten country in the great state of Ohio?
Yeah. So last week, or actually, I guess this was earlier this month, it kind of just became, more notable in public last week because the video from the incident was released. So on May 6th, Ohio State women's basketball coach Kevin McGuffey was arrested outside of his home and charged with operating a vehicle while impaired. That is simply the Ohio term for it. It's basically a DUI or a DWI. In other states, if you want to put it more simply, McGuffey was arrested for drinking and driving. Basically, someone, a neighbor or something, saw him running into curbs with his car and driving into a yard and a bunch of other things. And folks, if you watch the video, the body cam footage from police from this thing, it is not a good look. I will tell you what my dad said when he saw it. He said, my boy was lit. And he certainly, it seems that way.
I shouldn't be laughing, but I am.
He certainly seems to be very, very, very intoxicated. He has pleaded not guilty, which I thought was interesting. Through an attorney, and a judge actually granted his license back to him temporarily. And we'll see what happens at a later trial date. When this is heard and all that, presumed innocent until a judge says otherwise. But it's not a good look. It's not a good look for Kevin McGuff. And I mostly just wanted to point this out because there is a clause in Kevin McGuff's contract that basically would allow Ohio State to fire him for cause over this. It says in his contract that he can be fired basically for breaking any law of the United States or the state of Ohio. And this would certainly be a case where he has broken a law. You know, he was arrested and charged and the whole thing. And we'll see kind of what happens from here. You know, Ohio State says they're monitoring it closely. I just found it to be very interesting that this situation has arisen now because, you know, Kevin McGuff has not had like a sparkling record while he's been at Ohio State. He was in some, you know, NCAA violations several years ago and had some wins vacated and all that good stuff. Kevin McGuff also has a new boss. Ross Bjork is the AD now at Ohio State.
No one changes jobs quite like Ross Bjork, man. I feel like he's been at every school in the country at this point.
He's a well-traveled AD. You may know Mr. Ross Bjork if you're a college football fan as somebody who was well entrenched in all the Houston Nutt, Hugh Freeze stuff that happened at Ole Miss last decade. Also the guy who gave Jimbo Fisher his gigantic extension. Also the guy who later fired Jimbo Fisher and then hired Mike Elko. Also the guy, switching to women's basketball here, who hired Coach Yo at Ole Miss, who has done pretty well there. Also the guy at Texas A&M, who was there when Gary Blair decided to retire and poach Joni Taylor away from Georgia. So I just find it interesting and kind of, you know, covering like the coaching cycle this past year, thinking about like what Ross Bjork might do if he has the chance to hire a new women's basketball coach, or if he uses this as an opportunity to just, you know, go ahead and do one, or if he maybe waits it out and, you know, we'll see what happens and maybe Kevin McGuff sticks around and he can survive this. I think it's interesting that like he's in this situation with a new AD because Gene Smith was somebody who really protected Kevin McGuff from, you know, those NCAA violations and some other kind of hot water incidents he found himself in. If Ohio State does decide to make a change, they do. I think we talked about this on the podcast when it happened. They have Katie Smith on their coaching staff now as an assistant coach. So, like, if you wanted to go the in-house route, somebody who spent a decade has a head coach and an assistant coach and a very successful assistant coach in the WNBA, not a bad option if you have to go that route. So, that was probably one of the two biggest stories in the college basketball ranks last week. We'll get to the other one in a second.
You're also
in the Big Ten, though.
Yes, also in the Big Ten. You're also forgetting reoccurring character on this show, Mitch, a known villain in college basketball, or at the very least on the women's basketball podcast, Cody McMahon, who transferred away from Ohio State to where, Mitch? To where is she?
Ole Miss
with Coach Yo,
with Ross Bjork's friend, Coach Yo.
Yo.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin McGuff has, I think you might talk to some Ohio State fans and they might be very happy with what he's done there. And then I think you might talk to some other fans and they might be a little underwhelmed and a little bit disappointed just considering how much talent he's had on his rosters. And, you know, there's not a Final Four appearance in recent memory to show for it. I think maybe he has one Big Ten title. He was Big Ten Coach of the Year in 2024. He has won 4 regular season Big Ten titles and been to the Elite Eight once. So really hasn't had like the postseason success I think that you would hope when you think about the Cody McMahons, the J.C. Sheldons, the Kelsey Mitchells, like all these great players that they have had at Ohio State over the years. So, yeah, it's something worth keeping an eye on, just how this sort of progresses with Kevin McGuff.
For the sake of continuity, let's hit that other biggest storyline in women's college basketball. We all but broke it here on the Women's Basketball Podcast last week, Mitch. The very latest when it comes to a player that I did once call a game that involved her, and that is one Gracie Merkel.
Yes, Bellarmine legend Gracie Merkel. who spent last season at Penn State. We talked about this on the podcast last week because it happened as we were recording. So just real quick to kind of set the table for everybody, Gracie Merkel had a great year at Penn State this past season. However, Penn State was the worst team in the Big Ten. They had one Big Ten win this past season. She's like a walking double-double. She's like a legitimate post, very good player, really high up in terms of like statistical ranks in the country of field goals made per game and stuff like that. You know, just really efficient, kind of a throwback center, you know, 6'6", can protect the rim, has a soft touch around the rim, can rebound, all that good stuff, right? So she goes into the transfer portal. She visits and commits to and does the photo shoot and the graphics and all that good stuff with the University of Maryland, our friend Brenda Fries. And I even wrote a story after Gracie Merkel and Indiana Yardens Garzon and Duke's Aluchi Okanawa committed to Maryland. I was like, man, Maryland looks like the biggest winner of the transfer portal. Like they got these three really great players, all this stuff. So last week we get a tweet from Talia Goodman. And I was later able to confirm this and all this stuff that Gracie Merkel is not going to Maryland. She's returning to Penn State. And so after we got done with the podcast, I started just, texting coaches and trying to figure out like, how does this happen? How did this player go into the transfer portal and essentially sign with Maryland and then just decide, actually, you know what, I'm good, and go back to her old school? So I found out that, the National Letter of Intent, which was like this binding document that used to hold players to schools, and, it was really hard to break, really hard to get out of. You had to get special permission and a waiver and all that stuff like that if you wanted to break your NLI. The NCAA eliminated them in October, basically just waved them away and said, these aren't a thing anymore. And a big reason why, I guess, is because the NCAA is tired of getting sued because of the house stuff. So they got rid of the National Letter of Intents. And now, so when one player transfers to another school, they sign something that a lot of coaches refer to as a financial agreement. And I confirmed that Gracie Merkel signed one of these with Maryland. Thing is these financial agreements are very, very easy to break. There's a lot of loopholes that are easily exploitable. I had a Power 4 assistant coach basically tell me, you can get out of a financial agreement anytime now, as long as you haven't stepped on campus and started getting aid. I had another coach who basically told me, if they haven't attended a class, they can get out of it. So you're talking about kind of this time period that we're in right now in the calendar where kids are entering the transfer portal this spring. They're not leaving their schools right away. Like they're transferring and committing to this new school, but they're finishing out the semester. So yeah, they're not going to step on campus and start getting aid and start doing workouts and potentially go to classes until the summer, whenever the summer semester starts, or even the following fall. So for Gracie Merkel, yeah, she didn't step on Maryland's campus outside of that initial visit. I had another coach who basically told me, like, these financial agreements are like verbal commitments, essentially. I had somebody else telling me it's basically like a weak memorandum of understanding. Like they're just very easy to break and get out of. And so like my biggest takeaway from all this was, well, like, why haven't we seen more of this? And I think maybe it just might be because that kids didn't know how easy it was to break these things and how easy it was to get out of them. And I sort of wonder if Gracie Merkel doing this is like the Pandora's box and kind of the road to even more of this happening. Everything the coaches say about like, this is the wild, wild west, like it is, like it's anarchy. I don't want to like disparage Gracie Merkel for, having power and having choice and being able to do this stuff. But like, you think about the position that like it leaves the Maryland Terrapins in, like, this happened also, like, I don't know if last week was a dead period or the week before was, but Brenda Fries was out of the country. And this happened. And like, you're so late in the portal now. And for a month, you thought you had this position sewed up. All right, we got our center, and then Allie Kubik walks. And like, if Gracie Merkel doesn't come, maybe Ali Kubik doesn't walk. And, you know, I don't know what these coaches do. I don't know how to fix this. And maybe this is like why there's so many people at the NCAA level asking for Congress and asking for the president to help them out with this stuff, because it's pretty wild. You know, to have to deal with all this stuff.
Number one, correct me if I'm wrong. Since we already addressed the NFL, let's bring in college football. Jaden Rashada, I would like to believe, was kind of, I would argue, that was ground zero. And that was now, which is crazy to say, that was almost 4 years ago, with the Jaden Rashada going to Florida because he was promised $13 million, got to Gainesville. And to your point, Mitch, and this was prior to NLI, not NIL, NLI, National Letters of Intent, being phased out. He was on campus, but he hadn't actually enrolled in classes because he and his family wanted to make sure that they had the money. And so he was here, but because he didn't have the money, he didn't actually go to class. And therefore, I'm assuming, at least from my understanding of that situation, it made whatever agreement that the University of Florida was binded to null and void. So I would assume this is, again, common practice now, which is crazy. Number two is the argument then that Gracie, while still completing classes at Penn State, was given a more lucrative offer from the Nittany Lions. Is that the conversation, or?
Yeah. So I was, talking to a couple coaches and a couple other people, and basically, you know, you're trying to figure out, okay, well, what made her change her mind? And obviously, I don't know for sure. We haven't talked to Gracie Merkel. I haven't seen Gracie Merkel make a comment anywhere about why she changed her mind. So you can assume that one of two things happened, I think. You can either assume that A, she was promised a certain dollar figure from the University of Maryland, perhaps, and that check perhaps did not hit on the date that it was supposed to, which is a thing that we've seen happen at some other places. You know, the UNLV quarterback last year, right? So I think that's A scenario. Or B scenario, which would involve some breaking of some rules, is that while she was still on campus at Penn State, someone from the Nittany Lions coaching staff went to her and said, hey, you know, we got the product here now. We might have a bag for you if you wanted to come back. And I believe that's against NCAA rules now.
But there's no letter of intent. So is that a breach of the financial agreement, or what is that a breach of?
So the ESPN story I read about these financial agreements says that after you sign a financial agreement, you are not supposed to have communications regarding recruiting with other schools. And it would be, you know, not necessarily you breaking the rule, but the schools or the coaching staff breaking the rule. So I would assume that one of those two things happened. I don't think it was just she had an epiphany and decided that she wanted to stay in state college for the rest of her life. Or, you know, all of a sudden, like, she just really wanted to play with the product. Kyle Miller.
Another reoccurring character on this show, in case you're just joining us for the W season.
Yeah, and I had another coach point out to me, actually, that this has actually already happened during this transfer portal cycle, and like nobody just really noticed because it wasn't a big-time player. But Caitlin Duhan from Auburn, who's a pretty good defender, you know, averaged about 5 points per game this past year. She transferred on April 1st. She signed with Texas A&M. There's still an announcement on Texas A&M's website that, you know, hey, we got Caitlin Duhan, great, da-da-da-da-da. A couple weeks later, she announces she's going back to Auburn. And same thing, you know, just wiggled out of the financial agreement, you know, never got to College Station, and decided to go back to the Plains. You know, presumably, I guess, after they, you know, made a new coaching hire and all that stuff.
But that's the thing. That's where I almost give Auburn a pass.
Sure.
Which I don't know if those words have ever been uttered in sequence like that before, but I do give Auburn a pass, Mitch, because there was a coaching change. And historically speaking, that has always been the rule with the NCAA. If there's a coaching change, you are kind of free to come and go as you please within a 30-day window. Yeah,
that makes sense to me. You know, if you want to talk about like reasons outside of financial reasons for deciding to go back to your old school, like, you know, looking at the bigger picture and going, oh, actually, hey, I like that coach. I can play for him. and deciding, you know what, I will stay here. It'll be fine. That makes sense to me as a reason. But the Gracie Merkel Maryland thing, like it was either one or two things here, So I presume. But yeah, it's I suspect that this will not be the end of this. Maybe it'll be the end of it this season. But I think we're going to start seeing this a lot more, and probably a lot more in other sports as well.
And certainly Penn State and Gracie Merkel will see Maryland at some point in the Big Ten season, which will make
Circle that one
all the more fascinating. Two more notes to hit in this week's starting five before we get to what I think I don't even want to call it the main event, the main entree, Mitch. We may have to start calling it the beef, the big beef. What is the beef? And that may have to be a segment this summer on the Women's Basketball Podcast. But first, two other notes from the WNBA's opening regular season weekend. First and foremost, speaking of the Indiana Fever, the Dallas Wings watched both of their games to begin this 2025 campaign, the first two games of Paige Becker's career. And not just because they are armed with a quote unquote generational talent, the number one overall pick, but largely because of roster construction, perhaps inexperience at the head coaching position, a former star who is still a star, but how do we fit them in the backcourt together? I have felt a lot of parallels to the first half of the 2024 Indiana Fever season to so far through two games of this Dallas Wings 2025 campaign. And again, look, a lot of that is just low-hanging fruit. But watching Arike Agumbawale, I got to pull up her final line from Monday night because, I mean, it just felt like I was watching what I know.
Oh, I have it right here.
Oh, perfect. Read it off for us.
Monday night against the Minnesota Lynx. 16 points, 4 of 12 shooting, 4 assists, 3 turnovers, 0 of 3 from three-point land, 8 of 8 from the free throw line, 2 rebounds, a minus 20 on the floor.
Speaking of the number 20, this is a player who scored more than 20 points and averaged at least 18 shots per contest in the first 11 games of the 2024 season. Looked like she would be competing with Asia Wilson in the first half of the year in 2024 for MVP. And look, now she's having to complement Paige Beckers. Paige is going to be more of the facilitator. She's going to bring the ball up and down the floor. Where does that leave Arike? I bring up the Fever compliment and comparison to say we have seen Kelsey Mitchell now go from, hey, how do I fit alongside Caitlin Clark, to getting yet another contract with the Fever and enjoying a career year after the All-Star break, especially in last season. And so that's where I don't want to write off this Arike Paige great experiment. I also don't even want to get into, but maybe Mitch does, the Tierra McCown of it all. Because that viral clip of her storming off the floor on opening night and not having any sort of post-game huddle with her teammates for a veteran player and one of 3 returning players on Dallas's roster. Not a good look. I would also like to submit Maddie Segrist for the honorary Lexi Hull of the Year award nominee. If we're going to roll with this analogy here, Mitch, because my goodness, if I hadn't picked Rakaya Jackson as my silent assassin shooter of the year, Maddie Segrist looks much improved. And now I believe this is her 3rd season in the W. Very impressed with her, much like I was very impressed with Lexi in her 3rd season last year, where it all started to finally click. Look, I hope the Wings enjoy similar success to the Fever as they ended a playoff drought a season ago. But ultimately, it is going to come down to, much like it did with Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell, it's going to come down to that combination of Arike and Paige. Is this grand experiment going to work?
Yeah, Tierra McCowan from
I knew you wanted to get right into it. We're not even at the big beef yet, but yeah.
From that Minnesota Lynx game that they lost 99-84, she played 5 minutes, 0 points, 3 rebounds. I mean, she had a right to be upset. I think she could have helped them a lot in that game. And you go to their second game against the Seattle Storm, also a lost 79-71.
They were competitive. They cut it to 3 at the end of the 3rd quarter, beginning of the 4th quarter. It was a very competitive game, I thought, up until probably midway through the 4th.
Yeah, and it turns out Tierra McCowan played more in that game and played pretty well. 15 minutes, 10 points, 9 rebounds, 3 blocks, and that game's a lot closer, and she made an impact. So there's 2 things I think here. I mean, first is you have to figure out what you're doing with Tierra McCowan. Are you going to make a legitimate conscious effort to give her a real role on this team and work her into the lineup, or are you not? And if you're not, you probably just need to move on and you need to trade her, because I think there's teams that would like to have a Tierra McCowan on their roster. I mean, pretty solid rotation big. The
Earth,
other
I was
thing,
gonna say the Earth theory. There's not many 6'8", 6'9" players walking around the face of the Earth.
right, the you can't teach height, those 6'8"ers, they don't grow on trees. And then the other thing is the Eureka thing. I just read you her stats against the Lynx, and then against the Storm, I mean, worse, you could say. Shot 2 of 14 from the floor, 8 points, 1 of 8 from 3-point land, 2 rebounds. That was all in 27 minutes. You look at Enrique's plus minus from that night, it's minus 15. It's just not great. And like so far, again, like super small sample size, we're not even a full week into the season. It doesn't look like it's working. And I mean, these were a lot of the concerns that we had about Enrique Gumawale and Paige Becker's pairing. Would this work? How long would it take to work? You brought up like Kelsey Mitchell. I think the difference between Kelsey Mitchell and Caitlin Clark, and not Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell and Enrique Gumawale, while they're in similar situations, like Enrique is a legitimate like name star. I think Kelsey was like more a little bit in the wilderness, like trying to figure out like what is my role in this league? What can I do? Like we've seen what Enrique can do. Now she hasn't been on a team that's made a really big impact at all during her, I guess this is her 6th season in the WNBA now, 6th or 7th.
2019 draft class. So
yes, 2019 draft class. So it's like, I just don't know, like if she is somebody like, can you teach this old dog a new trick kind of thing? Like she's just always been that player where like she needs the ball in her hands a lot to make an impact. She needs to have a lot of shots. She needs to have the ball and kind of run the show and sort of be the bus driver to have an impact. Like that's what she was in Notre Dame, and that's basically what she's tried to be during this time in the W, and has led the league in scoring before and made her fair share of all-star teams and stuff like that. But it hasn't really turned into success in terms of wins and losses, in terms of success in the playoffs. So I just kind of wonder, like, if she can sort of fit into a different mold and figure out how to successfully play alongside Paige Beckers, because I have a pretty good idea of, like, given the choice between Paige Beckers and Enrique Ogunbowale, the folks in Dallas are going to say, we're going to ride with Paige, who we just selected number 1 overall. And like, we've done the Enrique thing for a few years now, and it hasn't really gotten us anywhere. And so we need to figure out what we have with Paige. And given the choice, we would like to see the ball in Paige's hands a lot more than it is in Enrique's. So I kind of wonder if at some point, if this comes to a head with the Wings, and okay, do we need to make a move mid-season? Do we need to make a move in the off-season to better engineer this roster around Paige Becker's strengths and really build around her, and stop trying to hang on to, the top draft picks of the past couple of years that you might have on this roster now? It's sort of like the Chicago Sky thing that I talked about earlier. Like, I think that the Fever are clearly ahead of both of those and trying to figure out what they're doing with their young star and what is the path forward.
I also invoke the Indiana Fever, who, by the way, currently trail the Atlanta Dream and friend of the pod, Carl Semesco, by 8 at the end of the first quarter. File that one away as we're recording. The Dallas Wings are on the Indiana Fever 2024 schedule path, if you may, because, yes, they now have their return, if you may, trip at Minnesota after hosting the Lynx on opening night. They then travel to Atlanta. Then they travel to Connecticut. Then they travel to the Sky. Those 2 home games to start the year were a lot of fun. Enjoy the road. Have fun figuring that one out too. Enrique, Paige, Chris, the whole crew. What a time for the Dallas Wings. Let's keep it moving with the final item in this week's starting 5 before we get to the big beef. And that is the Golden State Valkyries. A team that on this very pod, Mitch, we had questions about not too long ago. And while, yes, they did fall on opening night, what did you make of the Violets' debut in the WNBA? Because I was pleasantly surprised with what I saw.
It was fine.
It was against the Sparks, who are not exactly like world beaters and not part of that upper echelon of the league. But I was, I will say that it looked a little bit different compared to the Minnesota Lynx, who were in the early game of that doubleheader on opening night. Looked a little bit like a different sport, but that's okay, because I think that there is such a divide between the top four teams in the league and then pretty much everybody else in the middle class and then the bottom of the league. But no, at the very least, I was pleasantly surprised to say, okay, like there's a little bit of chemistry here. There's some pieces, and that of course is even with some significant injuries as well.
Yeah, it's just a roster that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me still. Like, Tiffany Hayes had a good night, and Temi played well. I don't understand why Kate Martin only got 3 shots. That I was kind of puzzled by that. I don't really understand why Monique Billings isn't starting. I would also probably start Julie Van Loo if I was coaching this team, but that's just me. It's just I just don't think the roster makes a whole lot of sense. And it was very cool to see, like, the building full and all that stuff. And hey, we got women's basketball, in this part of the country now and all that good stuff. I just, we've talked about this before, but I kind of just think they're taking a mulligan on this year in terms of like roster management and trying to be competitive, because the new CBA is coming, and like there's going to be a lot of free agents, and I think there are going to be a lot of free agents that want to play in the Bay Area, and like they're probably going to be able to get like some big name players when that part of free agency comes around. And I think they're just kind of biding their time, because I can't really come up with another explanation for why this roster looks this way.
And it stinks because I thought Jess Smith, the president, said all the right things in her interview pregame on Ion. Like, I thought how they've built this thing, the message, the culture that they're trying to build, I want to believe in it. And I want to ultimately say, hey, there's a long-term vision here. But yeah, no, in terms of who they selected in the expansion draft, what they did in the WNBA draft or did not do, yeah, there's still a lot of puzzling questions. Julie Van Loo, by the way, top 5 in the league in 3-point percentage. So yeah, probably want to play her, a little bit more, although she did play 27 minutes on opening night. For the Valkyries, the good news, or maybe not, because we're going to hit this team in last call. We have to, because they're off to one of the hottest starts in the league. Again, I know the season's just 5-6 days old. They will play the Washington Mystics at the Chase Center Wednesday. They then travel to Los Angeles, and then they got a nice, doubleheader against the New York Liberty on the road at the Barclays Center. Reality is coming. Poor little Valkyries. It is time, Mitch. It is time for my friends at Kansas City Sports Network. They have a segment called What's the Beef? I think that's what we're going to have to start calling it. We're going to debut this segment, and it's going to fill a good chunk of the rest of today's show, because it is the storyline in women's basketball. It is the storyline, you could argue, in basketball itself. Yes, even overshadowing the NBA conference finals. And that, my friends, is Angel Reese versus Caitlin Clark, part I don't even know what number we are at. The matchup on Saturday between the Indiana Fever and the Chicago Sky, the most watched WNBA regular season game on ESPN, not ABC, but on ESPN in the W's history. They got what they asked for, Mitch, because with about 4 minutes to go in the third quarter, what both Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark deemed a basketball play turned into much more. We actually have now gone in depth on this on my show, Helmets and Heels, here in Jacksonville on the radio the last 2 days. And certainly, I don't want to come off as insensitive and certainly not racist, but at the same time, I'm exhausted. I think you're exhausted. I don't want to belittle how Angel Reese and her teammates may feel if indeed racial slurs were uttered by the crowd in Indiana. But I also can't help but feel like we are taking this way, way beyond where it needs to be. Like, there's apparently a petition floating around online to have Caitlin Clark arrested because people think that she was like like in cahoots with Barstool and Dave Portnoy to like ensure her triple-double. Then there's also this like AI technology that the league's going to use to like
Oh my
be
God.
surveying the crowd. Then then there was also there's also a petition out there to move the All-Star game from Indiana because we're just blanket statementing saying that Indiana Fever fans are racist and you can't go to Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Like, I don't know how we've gotten here in 72 hours time, but maybe I shouldn't be surprised because for the last 3 years, this is what happens whenever these two players are on the floor at the same time.
Yeah, I gotta say, I was very happy to be busy this past weekend. I on Friday and Saturday, I was covering the NCAA softball tournament, which was a lot of fun. And then on Sunday and Monday, I had some friends from home in Maryland come to visit me, and I was hanging out with them. So I wasn't really on my phone a ton, and I was trying to unplug and be present with them and stuff. I'm so happy that I had those distractions. Because to borrow a phrase from our friend Joe Ovius, who likes to say that, of NFL media or just media in general, that Cam Newton makes people stupid. Caitlin Clark makes people stupid. And the combination of Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese makes people really, really, really stupid. I just I finally kind of waded into the wilderness of the internet today and a little bit yesterday, and saw some of the takes popping off. And I just, if it's if you take this play, if you take what happened here, right? We had a hard foul under the basket. We had a player who took offense to that hard foul. There was a little bit of a hold me back, but nothing really happened kind of
because
thing.
Because Caitlin Clark walked away, and that
right.
should be noted.
Growth,
people.
If this happened in an NBA game or in a men's college basketball game, nobody would have heard about it. Nobody, the only way we would have heard about it is if a star was involved, like Cooper Flagg or somebody. Or if you're talking about the men's college game, in the NBA, I don't think this even gets on the radar. It's just a hard foul, and oh man, and then this guy got mad, and then there wasn't a fight, but because it's Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, we have to wind our clocks back to the 2023 national championship game, and we have to have conversations about race, and we have to have conversations about culture, and we have to have conversations about the circumstances that created us to have all these conversations. And I saw Bomani Jones have a clip from his show on that he shared on Twitter, and he was like, we can't just talk about basketball when it comes to this stuff anymore. And that part of it is exhausting because I think if you're watching any other game, even if I was covering just a high school game or something, all that happened there is, and like Caitlin said, I mean, it was a business decision, right? Do I give Angel
And honestly,
Reese...
it was a smart business decision with how Angel Reese shoots free throws.
Totally. It's what any NBA player would have done to Shaq in that circumstance, in the mid-2000s.
And that's who Angel likes to model herself as. So.
Yeah. And it's okay. So do I give her a layup or do I give her a hard foul under the basket and send her to the line? Now, did Caitlin need to foul Angel as hard as she did? No. Did she need to take her to the floor? No. But let's be honest here. Caitlin is super, super competitive. Caitlin will be the first person to tell you that. You can see it every time she plays. Angel also super, super competitive. You can see it every time she plays. Both of these players got a little bit of asshole in them. Both of these players like to talk shit. Both of these players like to get in other players' faces. There is just a genuine competitiveness that is okay. We love that stuff. And we love that sort of stuff from our male athletes. Mm-hmm. And when we have those in football or men's basketball or whatever, we don't need to have a 3-day think piece conversation about what this means for the sport and race and worldwide implications. It's just oh man, did you see so-and-so getting so-and-so's grill? Man, that was kind of fun, right? If we had just let this go, we could have avoided all the ridiculous takery that we've had over the last 72 hours. But yeah, I don't really understand why we can't just talk about the basketball of it. Cause like
That's what
instead
we're
of,
here to do. We're here to talk basketball. And yet here we are.
and there were notable basketball things to talk about. Like instead of having the conversation about, wow, Caitlin Clark started the season with a triple double. Wow, the conversation that we just had on this podcast about how good the Fever looked. Or on the flip side of that, I think I saw some stat that Angel Reese was like the fastest player to like 450 points and 450 rebounds or something like that. We didn't talk about that. Nobody was talking about how bad the Chicago Sky looked in terms of just like a basketball product, right? All we're talking about is what all this stuff, and like it's just fuel for like the take machines, and like this, like I guess what bothers me is like this is the stuff from the WNBA that makes it into the mainstream. Like this is the stuff from the WNBA. And again, like, let's be clear about like what this stuff was: a hard foul and then a not great reaction to the hard foul, but not a fight. Like no punches were thrown, like it wasn't really like, nobody MF'd somebody else, like, in their face or whatever. That's the stuff that makes it onto First Take and Get Up and RG3's podcast. I didn't even know RG3 had a podcast where he's like doing a podcast in front of like Funko toys and his wife is just like sitting in the background very awkwardly. It's just a very weird circumstance. That's another conversation for another time. But yeah, I guess like that's what bothers me. It's just like this sport deserves like such better coverage other than just like that stuff. Like that's what bothers me, I guess. And like that's what exhausts me is like every time the mainstream like has things to say about women's basketball, it's always because of stuff like this. And I don't know how that's fixable. And I think like the league, certainly like this is probably what the league wants, I guess. Like there's a big reason why 2.7 or whatever million people tuned in, the highest viewed regular season game or whatever, or something like that in a while. There's a reason why so many people watched it. There's a reason why there's 5 Sky Fever matchups, I think, this season. I think this was the first of 5.
That's correct. There's 5, yes.
Yeah, like the league knows what it's doing here. I think the league knows that like every time that Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese meet on a court, there is a chance for something like this to happen. And there's a chance that if something like this happens, it then creates buzz and gets things going and creates a news cycle. Now, what the league doesn't want to do is have to launch investigations into people making, racist comments and remarks and noises or whatever happened there. Like, just to be clear, all that stuff sucks. And like, there's no room in the game for
I don't
all that.
want to come off as insensitive to if there were racial comments made. But at the same time, this is not the first time we've been down this road.
Right.
If I'm Angel Reese, if I'm the W as a whole, you have to be slightly concerned about Boy Who Cried Wolf at this juncture. Do you not?
Sure. Yeah. And like, just you're like, we're exhausted by this, right? Like we've been doing this. This has been going on now for 2 years. Like since that Final Four meeting in 2023 in Dallas, we've been doing this. And yeah, it's tiresome, to every time that Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese meet, we have to talk about everything except for basketball, everything except for how great both of them are as players. Or sometimes how great both of them are as players. Like there's room for criticism. Like I said, like nobody's really talking about like how bad the Sky looked because we're just talking about this one little incident between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese.
Which I would argue there is a portion of the population, and I think, or at least I'd like to believe, Mitch, that this is the mainstream sports population who have gotten more into the W since these two players and the legendary now 2024 draft class entered the league, who do recognize the basketball of it all. And this includes some of my colleagues at 1010XL who want they want a stat. And granted, all noted, shout out to Angel Reese, currently leads the W in rebounds per game, but they would like a stat for how many rebounds are off of her own misses and putbacks.
Sure.
And so, but you know what? But that is at least talking about the game of basketball. And I would rather be here discussing whether or not Angel Reese is the female Rodman, Shaq, or Ben Wallace than I would this conversation surrounding, well, they're at it again, and now we need to have a diatribe about race in America and where the W fits into it. And look, this is a league that has always been so open and honest about those conversations, and I appreciate that part of it. But at the same time, at some point in time, if you want to grow the sport, we need to talk about the sport too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's room for criticism and stuff. And by the way, I think Ben Wallace. That's a great comp. That's good.
That's
I
Kevin's
like
comp.
that.
Yes. Yep. And by the way, Ben Wallace never averaged more than 12 points per game a season. So but he averaged, I think it was like 19 rebounds or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So
Undersized,
that's an Angel Reese. That's an
rebounding
Angel Reese
machine,
line.
the whole thing. Yeah. The other like I think I saw Bomani say this too. Like, did we do this in the 80s? I say we because I wasn't alive. Like, did we do this with Magic and Bird every
No.
time they met? Like, did we have to have like a long conversation about race every time those two players met on the floor? I just we've done this. I don't really know what more else there is to say. And like, again, like separating this from the obnoxious idiots who said things like those people should be banned immediately.
Right.
Like, find out who did it. There's cameras everywhere. You can figure it out. Put your security people on it and get them out of the arenas, right? And nobody should have to deal with that, right? But like this, every time there's a little push or a shove or a hard foul, like we just have to have this big exhaustive conversation about the discourse.
Let's pivot this to more of a basketball conversation when it comes to these two. And that is, while I do believe that Angel Reese will vie for another all-star team, at least again, very early, but through 5 days of the 2025 season, don't think she's going to be pushing Asia Wilson or Fee Collier for MVP. I think you would agree. Caitlin Clark is in that conversation. However, and it was actually producer Dimitri who pointed this out to us, is there a world in which Caitlin Clark being the villain is also healthy for the W? Or does she have to be the protagonist?
I think she can be both, and I think she already is both. To depending on which fan base you ask, or depending on which group of people you ask. I think she started being both the moment that she beat South Carolina in the Final Four. And I would trace it back to the moment that she waved off Raven Johnson. When Raven Johnson got the ball at 3-point land.
I'd go behind. I would go to when she put her hand in her face to Haley Van Lith.
Was that tournament? I guess that was that tournament. Yeah.
That was tournament in
the Elite Eight.
Or the Sweet 16 or Elite Eight. Either way, back when Haley Van Lith was still playing at Louisville. That was when you could argue the villain. If you want to look at Caitlin Clark through that lens, you can. I personally, and this is what I responded to producer Dimitri, and I would tell anyone this, I view the villain streak in Caitlin as that maniacal competitor we talked about earlier that you cannot shake, that you see in, yes, here we go, Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Tom Brady, where kind of a bit of an a-hole.
Yeah.
Because she is just so damn competitive.
Yes.
And guess what? That's what makes her great. And it's okay to say that, because here's the other part of it too. This idea of never being satisfied, I think, is just so ingrained in who Caitlin Clark is. I don't even think it's something her parents taught her. I think she just was born with it. And it's just a curse and a blessing at the same exact time. And I think that, in my opinion, I would rather live in that world than I would sitting back, being comfortable and saying, okay, I went to 2 national title games. I was the number 1 overall pick. I'm chilling. I don't need to play an unrivaled because I have all this money from Nike and Gatorade. And also I want to just hang out with my friends. No, as multiple outlets have now detailed, she was in the gym every single day in Indiana, would fly to the NFL owners meetings, fly back immediately so she could get a 7 a.m. workout in at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. I would rather be the crazy person who is not comfortable with just sitting around and being okay with where they are. That's just me. And I believe that is the trajectory she's on. And by the way, I think Angel's on that same trajectory in terms of having that same spirit. And I think it's okay for both to exist at the same time.
Yeah, I think, I did a interview with I forget who's a Carrie Champions podcast. She had like a narrative thing about Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. And I made the point that, I think that one of the real reasons why Caitlin and Angel can't stand each other when they're on opposite sides of the court is because they're so much alike in terms of mindset, in terms of like just that fiery, unapologetic competitiveness. Like, I am who I am, and I want to kill you because you play for the other team, and I want to win. And like that's all it is. That's all it's about. They both said before they met up in the Elite Eight in Albany in late 2024, about a year ago now. Everybody was hyping it up as Angel versus Caitlin, and again, the selection committee knew what they were doing. They were making a television show, and so that's why they got paired up. But both of them said, like, I don't hate her and she doesn't hate me, but like we play for different teams, and like I want to win and I want her to lose. And like I think that's all that is. And like Angel very much, like I love, like you mentioned, all the stuff that Caitlin does that comes out like when she plays, and like just that competitiveness comes out, and like you love that stuff.
I mean, she said it on Letterman. She's like, I'm a psycho. Like,
yeah, I love that stuff from Angel too. Like you can very much tell, like she grew up playing on the streets of Baltimore. Like you can tell, like she is unapologetic. There's no back down in her. There's no fear. I mean, I love that clip from, I think it was her senior season when like she lost her shoe and still blocked, another girl's shot, and like the stare downs and stuff. And I love watching Angel Reese play, like when she's going, at her best. And I love watching Caitlin play when she's at her best. Like, my jaw was on the floor a lot of times, especially in that Final Four against South Carolina and Dallas, like when she was just making ridiculous shots. But like, I feel like that's more of like, what if, I was giving advice to the league and their sort of media apparatus, like, can we tone down like the conversations about like race and stuff? Like we've done that. We know what it is. And, and just hype up the like, hey, these are two of the most competitive athletes playing their sport right now at the highest level. And some stuff's going to happen between them. And like, we should be okay with that. We should celebrate it, even like the men do in football and their sports. Like, I think that we should be okay with that. And I think there's still a large population of just like society that is just like not comfortable with women being super competitive. And I think that when that stuff comes out, from Angel and Caitlin, and it mashes together and you get a moment like we did on Saturday, then we have to do all the things, and we have to get engaged in the takery and have all the thoughts and the long conversations. So yeah, it's exhausting.
What's the beef? That's the beef. It's time for last call. We're tired. It's 5 days into the W 2025 season, but that's not going to stop us from hitting a couple more storylines in the world of women's basketball. I want to start with this one, Mitch. I do want to hit a couple injury notes, but then I want to talk about the reclamation projects in the Washington, D.C. area, where, of course, you hail from the great state of Maryland. Want your thoughts on the Mystics. But first, obviously, stinks for Kalia Copper and the Phoenix Mercury that she will miss the next 4 to 6 weeks after left knee arthroscopic surgery. And then Ray Burrell, who we hinted at earlier, will miss 6 to 8 weeks with a right leg injury. Obviously, was going to be a pivotal piece for the Golden State Valkyries. So stinks for sweet baby Ray, and then stinks for Kalia Copper as well. Although I've heard more than one national analyst say maybe it's the best thing for the Mercury to have to learn all those new pieces to the puzzle without another variable thrown in the incumbent Kalia Copper.
Yeah. The Mercury have some things going on right now.
Yeah. Well, we're not even the Sophie Cunningham of it all. We're not getting to the Sophie. I promised we are not going to talk about it until
it's not good. It's not good.
The front office sports story doesn't have it in there, so we're going to leave that over there. We will address it when more information becomes available.
Yeah, I don't want to get sued. But it's not
Especially
good.
Not by Sophie Cunningham.
The vibes are not good.
The vibes are not good. But yeah, the Phoenix Mercury. A lot of new pieces to the puzzle. They'll figure it out. But at the same time, they're going to figure it out in a loaded middle class of the WNBA. Right now, at the forefront of that middle class, and I did not think I'd be saying this 1 week ago, The Washington Mystics, heard more than one person say Sonia Citron for WNBA Rookie of the Year. She hits a game winner in one of her first 2 games on the floor as a professional. You throw in Kiki Iriafen, who, by the way, I have now gotten 58% of the way through full court press. I love the Kiki's just such a sweetheart. You cannot not root for her.
Have you been in Kim Mulkey's closet yet?
I've not been in Kim Mulkey's closet yet, but I
Okay.
do find myself rooting for Kim Mulkey. More on that here in just a second. But no, I am very intrigued by the Washington Mystics, and not just because Lucy Olson made the team by virtue of Georgia Amore, unfortunately suffering a torn ACL.
Yeah. I'll tell you that, over the past couple of years covering the ACC and watching a lot of Notre Dame and stuff, while Sonia Citron never really got the shine because she was always either playing alongside Olivia Miles or Hannah Hidalgo or sometimes both. A lot of people that I watched Notre Dame games with would always say man, she's gonna be a great pro. She's gonna have a long career in the WNBA. She might not ever be a superstar, but she's got skills that will keep her getting a professional check for a long time. And I think you're seeing that with the Washington Mystics. 15 points and 3 assists and 2 steals and a win over the Sun. And then she has 19 points against the Atlanta Dream and another win. Pretty good. It's a bummer that Georgia Amore got injured. I think that she's still going to be a good pro, but so far, those other 2 first-round picks doing really good stuff. Her and Kiki Iriafen for the Washington Mystics. So far, it looks like they nailed that draft.
Yeah, and meanwhile, the Chicago Sky dealt away the 3rd overall pick for Ariel Atkins.
How's that going?
Yeah, how many points did she have in the loss to the Fever on Saturday, Mitch? I think it was. We're not going to go back to that. Sorry, Sky. We've really piled on you here on this week's episode of the Women's Basketball Podcast. I do want to also discuss the Atlanta Dream again, currently in action with the Indiana Fever as we're recording this podcast. A team record 36 threes in their opener. Not a surprise for either of the hosts of this podcast, who, of course, have followed Carl Semesco through his Florida Gulf Coast days. But certainly then on the heels of Ramona Shelburne's great expose and great one-on-one interview with Brittany Griner on ESPN, this idea of Brittany Griner didn't even want to leave the Phoenix Mercury, gets an opportunity for the Dream, says that it's not only reinstilled her passion for the game, but also has her thinking about the 2028 Olympics. We talked about the 2028 Team USA squad on last week's episode, this idea of would Brittany Griner be phased out? They're currently up by 4 on the Indiana Fever, who we just sang the praises of for the better part of the last hour, Mitch. I'm fascinated to see where the Dream goes from here, even if, much like the Valkyries or the Mystics, they are far from a finished product.
Yeah, I thought that that piece on Brittany Griner was really good. Was fascinated by the stuff about how Phoenix just didn't really want her.
Like we said, really lot going on with the Mercury.
Why that was.
Lot going on.
And yeah, I'm just fascinated to see sort of what I guess this season holds for Brittany Griner. If Carl Semesco and the Atlanta Dream can turn her into somebody who is a 30% 3-point shooter. I think that would help her, along her career. She's 34 right now. It would probably increase her chances of making the Olympic squad if that's something she really wants to do. Also, but as we talked about last week, I'm not sure if that's the best thing for Team USA to do. And I think that's one of the reasons why they brought in Sue Bird to maybe have some of those hard conversations with some of these vets. Brittany Griner is going to be 37 when the Olympics happen. Might be time for a younger post player to sort of take her spot, but we'll see. It's a fascinating experiment in Atlanta.
It is a fascinating experiment indeed. Also fascinating, Kim Mulkey's closet, yes. And also the fact that I, a noted critic of Kim Mulkey, the head coach of the LSU Tigers, found myself rooting for her throughout Full Court Press, ESPN's great series, which of course we detailed on last week's episode. Yes, I think the Notre Dame filter was on full display. I think that LSU recognized that series and the behind the scenes access that they were granted and that they had to permit because of Flau'jae Johnson's involvement. They viewed it as, hey, we're going to be as authentic and honest as we can, because this is going to be good PR for the program, a team that many believe will be, once the AP poll drops later, or I guess doing the math in my head, in the fall of 2025, they could be the preseason number 1 team in the country. And I think that the side of Kim Mulkey, the side of Flau'jae Johnson, hearing the story of her father's untimely death prior to her birth, her relationship with her mom, her relationship with Kim Mulkey, this idea of, which I empathize with sort of kind of here in the last month now covering Travis Hunter, this idea of she wants to be the first WNBA player to also have a Grammy. She wanted to pursue both passions simultaneously. Not every coach was willing to give her that opportunity, but Kim Mulkey was. And much like Travis Hunter having the opportunity to play both positions on offense and defense, like I'm here for it. And it again is just refreshing after all we've heard about Kim Mulkey stopping people from doing necessarily or stopping people from living necessarily their authentic selves.
Yeah, I came away, like I said, from that documentary finding Kim Mulkey to be, very charismatic and likable. But yeah, also somebody who, and like I kind of knew this, like Kim Mulkey is a very complicated person. Like we know about some of Kim Mulkey's politics. We know about, how she handled the Angel Reese suspension situation and like how that was not great. But also, like, I always go back to after they won the national championship in 2023, her first with LSU, and going into that locker room and seeing so many of her former Baylor players. Like, if you ride with Kim Mulkey, like she rides, like loyalty is a very like big thing with her, it seems like. And like, no matter what, like if you got her back and she has your back, like that seems to be kind of something for life. And it seems like she, generally speaking, does that with her players until, someone crosses the line one way or the other. I mean, we talked about how, during the preseason when the Sky went back there, how she gave Haley Van Lith flowers and hugged her and all that stuff. Yeah. So that documentary, like the Kim Mulkey part of it, like found her to be very charismatic and likable, and like just understood the Kim Mulkey of it all a little bit more, seeing her relationship with Flau'jae kind of up close. And yeah, I found Flau'jae to be like, someone who's like very easy to root for now. And like a very likable person. Meanwhile, I came out of it having a whole lot of more questions and about Hannah Hidalgo and everything that's going on with Notre Dame.
But I'm glad she got to see her grandpa for Christmas.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm glad they gave that access. Not that I gleaned a whole heck of a lot, but I'm also glad that Niele Ivey still stands by the Slam magazine cover t-shirt. Cool. Yeah.
Sure.
Did not age well. Final one from me. Dave Portnoy, since you're now a WNBA women's basketball fan, I don't know if the boys at OG Triangle Media would be cool with a simulcast, but probably need to lean into women's basketball media a little bit more, as Mitchell Northam noted on Twitter.
Yeah, I just found it interesting. I mean, like they have this media empire and like they have a podcast for everything else. I don't know if Barstool should or shouldn't have a podcast about women's basketball or not, but he seems to have an interest in women's basketball. And it seems to me that they as a company have an interest in making money. And as media companies are growing their coverage and growing their investment of women's college basketball, it just struck me as kind of interesting that like they don't have any sort of women's basketball podcast. So yeah, I just thought that was notable.
In the words of my friend Lisa Bluter, invest in women, invest in women's sports. Mitch, do you have anything else before we get out of here? You got to get on a plane tomorrow. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I am. I'm going to Minneapolis tomorrow where I'm going to watch Wings Lynx.
Love it.
And that should be a lot of fun.
That's why we didn't have Chef's Table, by the way, folks, because that is the main entree. He will be in person in the house up there in Minneapolis.
Yeah. I've been covering a lot of softball over at SB Nation the last couple of days because we're in the thick of the NCAA tournament. Super Regionals coming up this weekend. I'm going to be going to Columbia, South Carolina when I get back from Minneapolis to go down there to cover, the Super Regional between the Gamecocks and the UCLA Bruins for a spot in the Women's College World Series. So it's been fun kind of dipping my toes into a sport that I didn't really know all that well. But yeah, it's been fun. Softball, watch it, cool sport.
I'm beginning to think that we need to get you a condo or something in Columbia, South Carolina, with how frequently you traverse to the town that Dawn Staley calls home.
I've been there a lot. I'll have to try to see if I can see the Dawn Staley statue while I'm there this weekend.
Her new book also came out this week. I'm very much looking
that.
forward to ordering that and getting a chance to read that as well. He is Mitch. I am Mia. We appreciate you guys hanging with us here on the Women's Basketball Podcast. We will be back next week. Same time-ish, same place for sure. Although Mitch may be traversing the country once again in covering softball and beyond. Until next week, we will catch you later.
Deuces.